Laurie McFarland here. Welcome into Cross My Heart Ministry. Well, it's the end of the month and we're approaching a new month, and that means it's time to introduce our new Do It list. So I hope that many of you enjoy this free download we provide each month. The idea here is to give you one page to sort of keep home and hearth clean and organized and tidy. It's also intended to not be an end in itself. It's the whole idea here is to let you tackle those things, move them from the upper level of thinking down to just that lower level of doing, sort of form those habits, and then just sort of go on autopilot with the stuff we dread doing and feel under the pile for not doing, and sort of free us up to do the more important things. Of course, there are a few important things on the list as well, because we put some check boxes on daily to remind you to spend that time in the Word and to encourage you to memorize, and as well as all the other just tasks for managing your household. But I want to talk about one of those today on the daily list, and on our little freebie here, our little one-page helpful download. We have tasks for the day, tasks for each week, so there's 4 of those columns each month, and then some monthly tasks. If you go back and preview or take a look at some of the previous videos, each month we'll pick one of the items from one of the daily, weekly, or monthly tasks and sort of unpack that a little bit, maybe try to give you some ideas or inspiration for how you can utilize the list effectively. But today I want to talk about one of my favorite items on the list, and that is called Read One Chapter. Now, if you follow me and you know that we are devoted to encouraging women to love God and love His Word primarily, you might read that and think, oh, she wants me to read one chapter of the Bible. And I do want you to read one or more chapters of the Bible, or even a couple of verses, but that's not what that line item is talking about. That little check, that little item on the daily list is to encourage you to take a time out each afternoon or mid-morning or sometime in the course of your day and read one chapter of a real book. Are you a reader like me? Do you enjoy reading? Do you love to buy books but just never seem to get around to reading those books? A lot of the women that I know enjoy reading fiction, and who doesn't? It sort of lets you check out for a bit or just chase a story, and that's fun, that's okay. But I want to push you or challenge you a little bit to devote some time to reading some nonfiction, something that's going to challenge you, to stretch your brain, give you something new to consider or think about. Or even just historical fiction, it might be educational, but also biographies. Just a great way to learn about people from the past, to learn maybe a history book or a biography about someone famous. There's lots of great biographies out there. So I just want to challenge you to consider giving yourself a little mid-afternoon coffee break, making yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and sit down and read one chapter. If you're like me, there's always a pile of books there. You want to get through them. There's so many to read, and I just have a hard time getting through them. I have books started all over the house. But when I am intentional about this habit of stopping to read one chapter each afternoon, or even just, you can time it, just maybe take 15 minutes. It's a great diversion. It sort of resets the brain, giving yourself permission to do it. Now, like any other habit, it's a great idea, but it can fall apart without the execution. So what you're doing is what you're doing. If you want to challenge yourself to finish 12 books this year, one each month, then maybe this is an idea for how you can get started. And if you don't know what to read, or you've been thinking about doing this, and you maybe like an idea about what to read, I have a few ideas. In fact, I have 3 books that I want to recommend to you today. The first one is an assignment that I've given to myself because I've been invited to speak at a local moms group the first week of September. Now, if you live in Northwest Arkansas or anywhere close to my zip code in Siloam Springs, Mothering Matters is a group of moms. It's a little mom support group for moms of preschoolers. They meet at the Siloam Bible Church, and this kickoff event is going to be on Friday morning, September 8th at 9:30. And all are welcome. So if you want want to come, you come on, join us. I'll put the details for that in the notes below. But this is the book. I think this organization typically chooses a book that they read together and then they discuss it. They have small group discussion questions with their monthly meetings. And so this is the book they're reading this year. They've invited me to come in and sort of do the kickoff, and the timing was so perfect because this book is called Habits of the Household, and the subtitle is Practicing the Story of God and Everyday Family Rhythms. And the thing that was so amazing about that is having these family rhythms ties in with the do it list, but then also the Write the Word bookmark for this month is on praying for your children. So it's all a focus on family and children and rhythms. And so I just feel like that all that ties together nicely. In fact, I'm going to be making copies of the bookmark and the do it list and presenting those to the ladies that come that morning, all the young moms. But Justin Whitmel Earley is the author of this book, and I need to tell you, this is the best book on parenting that I've read in a long time. This may become my new purchase for every new mom when I buy her a package of diapers or a new baby outfit. I think I'm going to send along a copy of this book. I think the thing that I appreciate so much about Justin Earley is that he's so real. He's not writing this from the perspective of a guy who's got it all figured out and he's just telling us what to do. He indulges in some self-deprecating humor. He is very real. He takes us into his home, into his family, into his life. He paints some pictures for us that let us see that he is one of us. He knows what it's like to parent. They're in the trenches. He admits that parenting is such hard work. Now, this is a smart guy. He's lived on the mission field. He's learned Mandarin Chinese. He came back from the field and went to law school. He's a smart guy and has done some very hard and difficult, challenging things, but he puts parenting right up there at the top of his list. He and his wife have 4 young boys, and as they're writing this and sharing some of those stories, you just grow to consider him a kindred spirit. He understands what it's like to embrace those challenges of raising children. But here's the thing. I think he makes a good case that we really cannot parent our children well until we allow God to parent us. And so as he goes through challenging us in all these different areas about these habits of the family, it's very eye-opening. And he always comes from a place of reminding us that we don't do these things to earn God's love, but we want to live out this truth because we already are loved. And it's just such a great reminder. He talks a lot about what we say and what we do. And really, forming a habit is how we bridge that gap. But between what we say, we hold to, the truth that we hold to, the education that we've leaned into, but then the behaviors. He calls it education and formation. I like to say what I believe and how I behave. But challenging us to think through all of these different habits. And he opens up with just a story of a typical bedtime that could have been bedtime at your house, where he's wrestling boys to bed. All these things happen. Finally, he gets them there, and after just so many trials that keep coming and coming and coming and trying to get all them corralled. My husband describes a situation like that as trying to herd cats, and he's finally losing his patience, and he closes the door, and he sort of, in a very real moment, just talks about how disappointed he is with their ordinary. That a night like that, with the chaos and losing his patience, that those aren't the exceptions. He's realized that has become the ordinary habit of his family. And so trying to think about how that can be changed. And so he leans in through some other teaching he was exposed to, and then forming his own ideas about the spiritual significance of daily habits functioning as liturgies. And so liturgy might be something that you don't necessarily lean into that, or that's not your habit with your particular church, but the idea of liturgy and having some of these habits form and having a blessing that you speak over your children, I found just fascinating. And so he opens up with presenting a bedtime blessing, and he calls it of gospel love, and just these words that he speaks over his children, and they just sort of have this little script of what they say back to him, and it's a beautiful, sweet thing. And he talks about how when you try to initiate something new like that, you're just going to be torpedoed. It's going to unravel. They're not going to lean into it. But if we try anything once and it doesn't work out, what do we often do? Well, we toss it out. We say, well, I tried that. It didn't work. But he encourages you to lean into it. And don't we inherently sort of know that? Every new habit is not a habit until it becomes a habit. And it becomes a habit by continuing to do it. And so he talks about that's what happened with this little bedtime blessing, until he says nothing is normal until it is. It's a routine you practice, whether consciously or unconsciously. And then he shares the story about after a few days, one of his little boys said, "Can we have our blessing now?" And it was just that feeling of, wow, we've gotten there. This has become our new habit. It was the point where something we've done became something we do. And I just love that. And so it just became this remarkable daily ritual that they incorporated. And he goes on and shares all these different areas of how they've developed these habits in their home. And I really just applaud his ability to seize the day. In the midst of all the chaos and the child rearing, I think many of us look back with a lot of should-haves, would-haves, or could-haves with hindsight. But he's living this out in real time and grabbing a hold of this truth and taking time to write a book so that we can all sort of begin to learn from what he has done as well. And I just think it's very practical and pragmatic. It's not one of those books that gives you all the theories and the reasons and even the biblical basis for what you're doing, but it's very real and very pragmatic and really enjoyable to read, because again, he is so real with us in opening up the door of his home and inviting us into his life and into his family. So I think it's one of those books that you're going to want to stop and read a chapter and then sort of digest it and think it through and maybe apply some of it, discuss it with a friend. If you're a grandmother like me, maybe you want to buy a copy for the young parents in your family or give it as a baby gift. So I want to just read another couple of little quotes here before I move on and share my other two books with you. I don't want to give it all away. But he says, parenting your children is not just about what you are doing in their lives. It is first about the work God is doing in your life. And can I just say amen? I became convinced early on that God used my children to humble me and to teach me and to refine me and to transform me. And I don't think there's a Christian parent on the planet that wouldn't agree that that is absolutely true. That is, God pours into me or things that I didn't even realize I needed to learn, or even truth about God that I didn't understand, the depth of his love for me, how far he would go to he died for me, of course. There's nothing held back, but just understanding that better after I became a parent myself, the depth of my love for my children, the sacrifices that I am willing to make for them, how disappointed that his love for me will never change, but how sometimes I disappoint him. He says we can't make disciples without being disciples. We can't teach the grace of God outside of experiencing the grace of God. And oh, my friends, I believe that is absolutely so true. At the end of every chapter, he reminds us of the truth that our habits won't change God's love for us, but God's love for us can and should change our habits. And so I think child rearing is one of those things. It's such a busy season. It's so full. It's so demanding. You begin to wonder, what did I do with all the free time I had before? What were we thinking? Did we just watch too much television, or did we just have so much leisure? Because parenting is relentless. You're never off. You never get to check out. It is a sweet, blessed, and also holy time. And so if you're a parent, or if you're a grandparent, or if you know someone who's about to have a baby, highly recommend this book. Habits of the Household, Practicing the Story of God in everyday family rhythms. Just can't recommend it highly enough. So that's number one. Number two book that I want to share is one Kevin and I are going to start reading. Our pastor just finished, our church has been teaching through the book of Ephesians, and when they got to the passage on marriage, Pastor Nick issued a challenge to us to find a book on marriage and read it. And so Kevin and I accepted that challenge, and we chose one by one of my favorite authors, Dr. Timothy Keller, who is now graduated and receiving his eternal reward. But this man is just brilliant. I'm so grateful for Dr. Keller and so much that I have learned from him. And whether the topic is prayer or forgiveness or whatever, when I think I understand something, and I'm sure it's going to be the same about marriage, and I have read part of this book, but I'm going to start over to read it with Kevin. But whatever the topic is, when I read Tim Keller's teaching on it, I realize that I had a kindergarten level understanding, and now I'm getting a college level graduate degree look at it. He just has a way of teaching in a way that is understandable, but also scholarly. He just takes me deeper into a greater understanding of some truth that I need to know. So if you are married, so we've talked about children and family. If you're married, and maybe this will be a good practice for you and your husband to also accept the challenge from my pastor to find a book on marriage and read it together. So each of us have our own copy. We're going to read a chapter at a time and discuss it. It may take us a while to get through that for us both to be reading the other things we're reading and me studying, preparing Bible study, and him working full time. But we're going to get through this book together no matter how long it takes us. But if you are looking for a book on marriage, or you have a couple in your life that is getting married, this would be a great one to give as a wedding gift. And then the third book I want to recommend is one for you to read aloud to maybe a child or a grandchild. So I guess this is sort of a family and marriage focus with the books I'm recommending this month. But this one is a missionary biography. There's a series that YWAM, Youth with the Mission, publishes where they focus on different Christian heroes of the faith. Christian missionaries are featured in there. And so I wanted to pick one that was a woman to inspire our oldest granddaughter, Julia Grace. And so I chose Gladys Aylward. I remember reading that to our children when they were little. She was a missionary to China, but she was just this little woman from London, England. She wasn't educated. She was a maid, a housemaid, and she felt God was calling her to go to China. And she couldn't get the backing of a missions organization. She had no one sponsoring her to go. She did not have any education, but she heard God telling her to go, and go she was going to do. And so she just kept working, cleaning houses until she saved enough money to buy a one-way ticket to China, somehow got a connection with the woman she was going to meet up with there, and she had to chase that woman across to connect with her in China. It was cheaper to go across land by train than to take the boat, so she did that. Ended up traveling through a war zone on the Russian-Chinese border. It's just a wild story, but an amazing story of adventure, and seeing how God could use a very ordinary person to do such extraordinary things in advancing the gospel in such a difficult place. So that was a very inspiring story. If you read it, I recommend having a world map close by so you can follow where she traveled and where she was and just see her story unfold. So that's one that I would recommend. I will put links to all three of these books in the notes below. There'll be a link that you can find on Amazon. It's a little referral link, so if you buy it from my link, the ministry might get a couple of pennies, but probably not. But at least you'll be able to find it if you want to order one of those three. But I hope that whether it's one of these three books or another one, you will challenge yourself to develop that habit of reading something that will stretch your mind, that will broaden your perspective, that will educate you in maybe a new area. Even if you like to read, maybe reading something other than just fiction would be a new thought for you. And if you're not going to do it every day, then maybe one day a week you will decide that instead of stopping to read the book that you enjoy, that's your go-to to entertain yourself, you'll stop and choose a book that you will read to learn something new, just some sort of a nonfiction book, spiritual or Christian or otherwise. And maybe it will develop that new habit that if you read one chapter of something like that, each week or 2 or 3 times a week. It's amazing how carving out that little bit of time will help you get through those books that you want to read and you've longed to read. And if you're like me, sometimes they're stacked up and you almost feel like that stack of books is mocking you because you're not getting to them. And so I'm just determined to give myself that gift of time to read. Even if it's just 15 minutes once a day, I'm going to get through them. Thanks for spending part of your day with us. I hope that I've challenged you to do some reading and to maybe pick up one of these or add them to an upcoming Christmas list for someone you love. For Cross My Heart Ministry, I'm Lauren McFarland.